Okay, my name is Herb Gorman.
Great, perfect.
Well, I was born in the Bronx, in New York City, lived in the Bronx until I got married and then moved out to Queens, out to Rosedale. I certainly went to Mass all the time. I went to a Catholic school. I got a good education from it. Annette was a very big part of my childhood as well as my adult life. We were both started school in the first grade in St. Augustine's School in the East Bronx. Over the summer, independently and with no connection, both our parents moved to the West Bronx. And one day my mother is coming out of the house and looks across the street and says, "Mary, what are you doing here?" And Mary said, "Ruth, what are you doing here?" We now lived across the street from one another. Went to the graduation dance in grammar school. Our parents arranged for the date, and we went to grammar school dance together. Then on August 9th of 1952, everything changed. She woke up with a sore throat and didn't feel too well. They called her the family doctor, and he came to the house and told her parents that she had polio. And she packed a bag, walked herself to the train, walked from the train to the hospital, and by that night was in an iron lung in a coma. And one of the last things she did on the way to the hospital was to drop my birthday card in the mailbox. She had to go by the post office on her way to the bus. That was the point at which my life changed. Not as much as hers, but it changed. I started going to daily Mass. The family was saying a daily rosary in the evenings. I was the first one outside of her immediate family who got in to see her, because I had the priest who had been my teacher in high school and who later married us dragged me along when he went to visit her. Annette was in the hospital for 2 years before she came home. Annette unfortunately never recovered. The limit of her movement below her neck was that she could raise the fingers on her left hand. Every time I would visit her, she says, "Why don't you go on a date? Why don't you see other girls?" And finally I did. And I would go out and I'd take the girl home. And then I'd go down to the hospital and visit Annette. She, kept trying to get me out of her life because she knew what her life was going to be. After she came home from the hospital, I bought a 2-door car so that I could put her into the front seat of the car. At that point in time, the respirator that she was using, the machine that powered it took up the whole back seat in the car. And it took from 1954 till 1959 for me to convince her that we should get married. And we finally did. Before we married, Annette wanted to talk to the doctor, the two of us to talk to the doctor, and he said that we should be able to count on 10 to 15 good years at least before she would pass. We were married 56 years, which again was a surprise to the entire medical profession.
Sure.
And he said there was no reason that she couldn't have children, that there was no reason from the polio that she couldn't have children. Our daughter was born in December of 61, and we had been married at the time 2.5 years. Well, we knew it was God's will. I mean, this is what he had chosen for us, and he must have had his reasons. And as we went through it, everything in our life got easier because of other things that were happening in the world. And all of a sudden there were laws coming along that made life easier. They had to have curb cuts on the streets in the city. They had to have buses that kneeled, and you could roll a wheelchair right into the bus. The machine itself went from being a machine that took up the 2 back seats in the car to a one-handled cosmetic case. Everything made life easier. You had to thank God for this. But when we came down to Florida, the nurse that we had was coming in very early in the morning, so I was able to go out and get to Mass in the morning. And I started doing daily Mass down in Blessed Sacrament. So we were always active in the faith. We prayed together, we said grace together before meals. Annette and I had such a great life together. I mean, we did everything. We did things that able-bodied people have not done. We traveled the world. We were in Canada twice. We were in Puerto Rico twice. We were in Spain, and Italy, in France, Switzerland, and in England. We were able to do all these things, and we did them. And she had always said, no machines if I go in the hospital. But what we had agreed was that we would do the dialysis until her blood was back where it should be, until everything was right, and then we would see if the kidney took over. If the kidney took over, fine, she would come home. If it did not, that was what God wanted. And I was perfectly prepared for either outcome. Her daughter and I were each with her, holding a hand when she passed. It was not a difficult time for me because I was so happy for her. And we had had all these years, all these good memories. I said, if I was walking around with a sad face and tears in my eyes, Annette would come back and slap me upside the head. That was the way it was. I knew that if she was not with God, there was not a heck of a chance for the rest of us. After Annette died, I resumed daily Mass, and we had both known Cece from church and from the ministers to the sick. She always used to be at those meetings. She'd come over and talk to Annette. She and Annette were friends. I was an aside. And they were two of a kind. They were both empathetic, is the word I want. They could see somebody, look into their eyes, and see that they needed help or that there was something wrong. I came to know it working with her on the bereavement ministry. And I would see Cece at the Mass, and God has strange ways, but if you are a Catholic, you have to know that He's there and He's doing things. There's a website called Catholic Match, and it used to pop up on my emails routinely, and I'd click it. One time I just decided, just for kicks, if I'm going to look for a wife, I would look on a Catholic Match. So I start on this thing one day, but I'm flipping through a couple of pictures, and here's this redhead. I said, for heaven's sakes, she's the one that's been trying to get me to come to the widower's breakfast all the time. So the next day, I call her on the phone, and she said, are you calling about the widowers? I said, no, I'm calling because I'd like to ask you out to breakfast after Mass on Tuesday. Well, it turns out Tuesday is Valentine's Day. She says, that's Valentine's Day. I said, yeah, I know. I didn't. We go out to breakfast, and virtually the first thing out of her mouth when she sits down is, I want you to know that I have no intention of ever getting married again. And I said, gee, I'm sorry to hear that. Maybe I can change your mind. Then we're talking, we find out that her husband and Annette both died on the 27th of October. 16 years apart, but the same date. And that's when we decided that that's the day we would get married. because it would turn a sad day into a happy day. So again, God did that, and he wanted us to be together so I could take care of her. And she didn't know it at the time. She was the caregiver in the beginning. Well, she was diagnosed in August before our second anniversary. We started the chemo treatment right away and continued with chemo, I guess, until about May, maybe June. Well, the chemo stopped working. And she said that the Lord has my name in the book. He's got the date I was born, and he's got the date I'm going to die. And there is nothing that I can do here that's going to change that. So she said, I'm going to stop the chemo. We'll live as well as we can until the time comes. I don't know how I could have done this if I wasn't a Catholic and had God to rely on. I knew that he was always with us. And I knew that where she was going to be was going to be a much better place. If you have faith, and if you believe in God, and you know he's there, and that he's a good God, and that he is with us all the time, there is nothing that life can throw at you that you can't handle.